A rancher discovered an incredible woman living in his cabin. You won't believe what happened next. Jake Thompson's breath hung in the crisp winter air, the biting cold seeping into his bones as he surveyed the sprawling plains that had been his family's land for generations. Alone now, since his father had passed, he felt the weight of tradition and grief bear down on him, tightening like a vice around his chest. The ranch stood as both a monument to their lives and a reminder of how quickly everything could slip away. He could almost hear his father's voice urging him to preserve the legacy, but the land was slipping through his fingers, debts piling up. The bank, with its cold, suit-clad men, loomed larger in his thoughts each day. Unease twisted in his stomach like a lariat tightening around a wild steer. He had fought for this land with both sweat and resolve. Would he have to let it slip away? The ranch was not just land, it was home, a piece of his soul. But winter had come, its ruthless grip worsening his struggles. As night fell, Jake made his way to the remote edges of the property, his mind racing with conflicting thoughts. The cabin had been a childhood haunt, forgotten over the years, now appearing more like a ghost than a refuge. There was something strange about that place. It stirred feelings of nostalgia tinged with dread. He hesitated. What if it had been abandoned, a decaying remnant of better days? But driven by a mix of curiosity and desperation, he pushed open the creaking door. Inside, he was met not with decay, but with unexpected warmth and the faint scent of herbs. His heart lurched. There, hunched over a counter cluttered with dried plants, was Clara. He hadn't expected to find anyone, let alone a woman immersed in the intricate world of botany. Something about her captivated him, and yet provoked an instinct to retreat. "Who are you?" he demanded, the tension creeping into his voice. "What are you doing here?" Her eyes sparked with defiance, merging intrigue with resolve. "I could ask you the same." Each word felt like a challenge, igniting an instant friction that sizzled between them. They debated the merits of land use versus scientific discovery, each remaining entrenched in their beliefs. He saw her as an outsider, an interloper detouring from his hard-won reality, while she viewed him as a stubborn traditionalist stuck in his ways. The stakes were rising. Just as he began to feel a connection, doubts clawed at him. Urban sophistication and rural grit clashed in a battle he was unprepared to confront. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. But just as thoughts of cooperation began to flicker in the dim light, Clara revealed her own struggles against a societal fabric that had long rejected her. Their barrier seemed insurmountable, yet the truth rippled beneath the surface. Beneath the cabin's rustic charm, Jake sensed the unease of economic realities. The bank's threat loomed like a spilled storm on the horizon. Suddenly, he wasn't just fighting for his ranch's legacy. Clara's unexpected presence stirred something deeper, a desire to safeguard more than just his own dreams. With every word exchanged, doubt gnawed at his resolve. What if he couldn't keep the ranch? What if he lost everything, including her? They stood at a precipice, the air thick with silent questions left to simmer. A choice between the suffocating grip of tradition and the horizon of something new. Would he fight for the land? For the woman who, against all odds, had ignited a flicker of hope in him. The flickering candlelight cast shadows on Clara's face, illuminating the fervor in her eyes. Jake shifted his weight, the tension simmering between them palpable. In that small cabin, he felt the weight of decision pressing down like the snow accumulating outside. "Listen," Clara began, her voice steady yet laced with urgency. "Your struggle, it's not just yours. Every time I take a risk with my research, I'm up against a system that doubts me, dismisses what I bring to the table. But I know there's a way to blend the old and the new, to revitalize this land and make it prosper, if only we'd work together." Her words struck a chord within him that resonated deeper than his fears and doubts. He had lived in isolation for too long, nurturing his pride to the point of choking on it. Was it only to fight to keep this land unchanged? Or could it mean evolving, preserving not just the soil but also the life it could sustain? Jake found himself entranced by Clara's vision, stoked by their earlier debates. "But what do you know of ranching, Clara? You can't just come in here and tell me how to run my father's land," he challenged, though his voice lacked conviction. "I know enough to see potential," she replied, frustration coloring her tone. "Look around. The methods of the past are crushing the future. If we keep doing what's always been done, we'll lose it all. This ranch, your legacy, and the very spirit of the land. So what is the point in holding on to traditions that aren't working?" Jake clenched his jaw, grappling with the undeniable truth in her words. It was time to confront not just the realities of his situation, but his stubbornness as well. The bank wasn't just a faceless threat. It represented challenges he hadn't been willing to face head-on. The idea of change felt like a betrayal. Yet watching Clara, he recognized her tenacity. She had found her own battles amongst the murmurs of societal rejection. Realization washed over him. He didn't have to face this alone. The weight of tradition didn't mean he had to stifle growth. The uncertainty hung in the air, potent and heady. He took a breath, bracing himself to voice the shift in his perspective. "What do you propose, then?" he asked, his voice steadier this time. Clara stepped forward, her demeanor shifting from defense to determination. "Let's start small. I can show you how to use your resources in a way that respects the land while planting new seeds. Literally, we'll create a garden that can attract new life, both animal and economic. People will come to see what we're doing here. Your ranch could become a beacon of innovation, not just another relic of the past." Jake scrutinized her face for a hint of falsehood, but all he saw was resolve. The idea of a community hungry for change stirred a flicker of hope within him, even as fear held its ground. Could he truly let go of everything he'd thought was right for the promise of what could be? As the night wore on, they mapped out ideas, found common ground amidst disputes, and shifted the dynamic from antagonism to collaboration. With Clara outlining plans peppered with her passion, Jake felt the mold of his stagnation crack, opening the door to tentative excitement. But dawn would come soon, and with it, the reality of his situation. The bank would still demand answers, and he needed to act fast. As they huddled over makeshift plans, Jake decided that it was time to brave the meeting with the bank's representatives. Would they listen? Would he be able to pivot his narrative from despair to innovation? The next morning, he would step into their world, facing not just men in suits, but the specter of his own fears. The time had come to face the uncomfortable truth. The legacy of the Thompson Ranchation depended not just on guarding tradition, but on the willingness to redefine it. Would he seize this moment, or let it slip away like so many before? The sun's first light spilled into the cabin, illuminating the stillness that hung heavily in the air. Jake rose early, his mind a tangled web of uncertainty and determination. He could feel the whispers of doubt urging him to retreat, to cling to what was known, the comforting routine of tending to the familiar, even though it was crumbling beneath him. Looking around the cabin, remnants of their impassioned exchange lingered. Scraps of paper covered in hastily drawn diagrams lay strewn across the table. Clara's vision had shattered his complacency, but could he actually embrace a reignition of purpose? The urge to pull back surged within him, yet another instinct compelled him to break free of the chains he had forged in stubbornness. He dressed mechanically, focusing on each action, buttoning his shirt, lacing his boots, grounding himself in the physicality of the moment. As he stepped outside, the cold air prickled his skin, a stark reminder that things were changing. The frost-laden ground crunched beneath his boots, each step feeling more purposeful. When he arrived at the bank, the scent of coffee mingled with the sterile feeling of polished wood and steel walls. He had envisioned this encounter as a confrontation, a battle against those who he believed were attempting to strip him of his heritage. But Clara's words echoed in his mind. It was time to redefine the narrative. His narrative. Jake took a seat in the waiting area, his heart racing against the cadence of ticking clocks. He had spent so much time bracing himself against adversity that he hadn't considered how he might wield his voice in a compelling way. What if he reframed this meeting as an opportunity? What if he approached it with the curiosity that Clara had shown him? As the door to the boardroom swung open, he steeled himself, rising with a newfound resolve. The representatives greeted him with tight smiles, their faces polished masks of professionalism that concealed the underlying skepticism he had learned to expect. But as he stepped forward, he claimed the space with conscious authority, allowing his fears to dissipate like morning mist. "Thank you for seeing me," he began, his voice unwavering. Speaking about his ranch, he shared Clara's vision, elaborating on their plans to cultivate new practices, a garden that would breathe new life into the estate and potentially attract economic interest. He framed the ranch not as a relic, but as a vital contributor to the broader agricultural landscape, one ripe for progress. Yet doubt crept in with each sentence, the skepticism of the representatives looming like shadows around him. Would they see beyond the traditional metrics of profit? He paused, scanning their expressions, seeking some flicker of hope. Reading their dismissal would be easy, but succumbing to it wouldn't be. "I understand there are risks, but the greatest risk lies in stagnation," he continued, his convictions gaining depth and clarity. The passion he once reserved for defending a legacy now surged forth to create a future. The back and forth unfolded, negotiations punctuated by questions, the atmosphere electric with tension. At that moment, Jake recognized the revelation within himself. He possessed not just the right to protect the ranch, but also the responsibility to innovate it. Each argument he countered became another step away from fear, and toward the possibility of redefining himself, not merely as a rancher, but as a steward of change. As the meeting drew to a close, he felt an unfamiliar sense of empowerment. However, their final words lingered in the air, weighted with ambiguity. There were conditions attached to their support, obstacles he would need to navigate. Walking out of the bank's imposing doors, a surge of adrenaline fueled him, the uncertainty of the future crystallizing into the realization that this was only the beginning. Just as Clara had once faced her own battles, Jake had begun to confront his. Now he stood at a crossroads. He could either retreat to the confines of tradition or step into the fertile unknown that awaited him. The decision loomed heavy, and as the chill wind whipped at his face, he understood that the next choice would define everything. The moment had arrived where he would need to trust not only in Clara but also in himself. Would he risk it all for the chance at something extraordinary, or would he retreat to the familiar safety of his past? The answer awaited him where innovation and tradition clashed. The remnants of uncertainty gnawed at Jake as he walked back to the ranch under the fading light of day. Each step felt as though he was traversing a fine line between lingering fear and burgeoning aspiration. Clara's words replayed in his mind, each echo pushing him toward a decision that felt monumental in scope, yet personally intimate. He reached to open the gate, hesitating just for a moment, as if the structure itself could gauge his resolve. Shouldn't a rancher be tied to tradition, to the practices that had sustained generations? But another part of him, a part that Clara had nurtured, urged him to explore the unfamiliar domains of progress and sustainability. Inside the ranch, the atmosphere was different. The smell of freshly turned earth wafted through the open windows, mixing with the familiar scents of hay and leather. His stomach knotted with anticipation. He recalled the sketches from their discussion, fleeting ideas transformed into tangible plans. He needed to take action. But what would that look like? He decided to dive into his evening routine, but with a fresh mindset. Instead of going through the motions, he took time to consider each task. While he groomed the horses, he could envision Clara among them, sharing insights about their care. Suddenly, the work felt infused with a new meaning. His internal dialogue turned increasingly strategic as he considered the conditions the bank had placed on their support. Market research, new irrigation practices, and partnerships were all foreign concepts to him, but not insurmountable. He could spend the coming weeks educating himself, seeking out resources that had previously felt unreachable. For too long, he had been the isolated island of old-school ranching. Maybe it was time to connect with others who shared his vision. That night, with a restless mind, he pulled out his laptop and began digging. Blogs, forums, and digital seminars popped up across the screen. A wealth of knowledge at his fingertips. Throughout the evening, an elation surged within him, stemming from not just the information itself, but from the realization that he could wield it to transform his ranch. Yet, amidst his enthusiasm, a new worry crept in, gnawing at the edges of his newfound clarity. What if he failed? What if these ideas culminated in disaster rather than the success he imagined? He was familiar with failure, but this felt different. The thought of letting Clara down loomed larger than the fear of public failure. He had to do right by her vision as much as by his own. With this more profound concern lurking, he pressed on, drafting a list of potential community partners. Various local groups focused on holistic farming practices, young farmers eager to share innovative techniques. He could summon the courage to reach out and collaborate. As the hours slipped by, Jake lost sight of the clock, plunging deep into planning mode. His resolve solidified into a determination that felt like home soil beneath his feet, rich and ready for planting. The next morning, he awoke a little earlier, prepared to move forward with emails and calls lined up in his schedule. He would no longer stand at the precipice of change, hesitant. Instead, he would step forth, embracing the uncomfortable paths toward growth. But the day held surprises. Unexpected visitors would soon test his resolve and alter the trajectory of his plans. As the sun rose high, anticipation mixed with trepidation. Would these newcomers propel him further on his quest for innovation, or serve as reminders of his deepest fears? The moment approached where Jake would confront not just external challenges, but the very limits he had placed on himself. Would he rise to face the unknown, or would doubt anchor him once more? Jake took a deep breath, the early morning air crisp and invigorating. Today was more than just another day. It was the start of something that could alter the trajectory of his life. He moved through his chores with purpose, almost mechanically, while internally he strategized. The possibilities seemed endless, yet each idea bore the weight of expectation. As he finished feeding the livestock, his mind lingered on the list of potential partners he had drafted the night before. They represented not just resources, but expansive networks and ideas that could breathe new life into his ranch. Deep down, he felt a flicker of excitement, one that danced precariously close to fear. Perhaps it was the notion of reaching out to strangers that unsettled him. Would they dismiss his attempts at modernization as naive? Would they see him as just a traditional rancher clinging to outdated practices? Questions swirled through his mind like autumn leaves caught in a gust. Time slipped away, yet Jake found himself absorbed in his tasks, allowing the physical work to anchor him. He felt the rhythmic motions of his day calming his tumultuous thoughts. But when the call to venture outside his comfort zone beckoned, anxiety crept back in, gnawing at his resolve. Finally, with a trembling finger hovering over the keyboard, he initiated an email to a local cooperative that specialized in sustainable agriculture. Words poured out in a flurry. His background, his ambitions, the commitment he had to preserve his family's legacy while embracing modern techniques. Would they understand him? Would they hear his desperation for growth? Just when he was about to hit send, a rumble of tires broke his concentration. Looking out from the ranch, Jake recognized a truck he had seen in town. His heart raced as he approached the gate, uncertain of who it might be. As the vehicle rolled to a stop, he caught a glimpse of two familiar figures, Tommy and Sarah, fellow ranchers, but not typically those whom he would consider allies. "What brings you here?" Jake asked, masking his surprise with a cautious greeting. "We heard about your plans to adapt," Tommy said, leaning against the truck with a relaxed demeanor that contrasted Jake's internal turmoil. "We're curious, maybe even interested in what you're envisioning." The unexpected warmth of camaraderie washed over Jake, a fleeting beam of hope illuminating the doubts that clouded his mind. Here stood potential allies, bearing not only questions but also opportunities. Perhaps he wasn't as isolated as he believed. Jake felt the urgency swelling within him, a desire to showcase his ideas, to illustrate his vision with the passion he had developed over countless solitary nights. He gestured towards the barn, inviting them inside. The air thick with possibility, he dove into a presentation of his dreams. The holistic practices Clara had shared, the community ties he wished to build, the innovations that could redefine their lifestyle. As he spoke, he saw their eyes widen with intrigue, yet he also caught glimpses of skepticism. He felt their curiosity juxtaposed against the weight of his own insecurities. Would they believe in a future that included him at the helm? At that moment, the interplay between trust and doubt became palpable. The initiative to rally support hung delicately in the air, teetering on the edge of something profound but frightening. If they embraced his vision, it might transform the world of ranching they shared, inviting in fresh perspectives and new responsibilities. Yet, if they dismissed him, silence stretched between them as Jake's voiced aspirations echoed in the barn's wooden frame. "Jake," Sarah finally said, breaking through the tense stillness, "we need to talk." His heart raced, uncertainty gnawing at him. The conversation he had hoped for now hinged on decisions he hadn't entirely anticipated. Would this alter his already delicate balance of courage and self-doubt? Or would it propel him further along the path he desperately sought? As anticipation gripped his chest, Jake realized the day was unraveling into a crucial turning point, one where belief and fear would clash head-on, determining not just his future, but the very way he would face his own limitations. Yet beneath the surface of impending decisions, a more profound truth lurked. The potential for collaboration had entered his world. How could he navigate this new dynamic while remaining true to himself? The time had come to face that elusive reality, the nature of connection. What would be revealed as Jake ventured deeper into this uncharted territory? Jake stood in the barn, his mind racing as he faced Sarah and Tommy. Their eyes held an unsettling combination of curiosity and skepticism, forcing him to confront the reality of his situation. With the scent of hay and wood surrounding him, he could feel the weight of their expectations pressing down, tightening around his chest. "Okay, let's talk," he finally said, his voice steadier than he felt. He gestured for them to sit on the wooden stools scattered in the corner. The act felt almost ceremonial, as if he were preparing to unveil a masterpiece that he had been laboring over for years. It was a moment that could redefine everything, the potential for a collaboration that could pull him from the brink of isolation. "What we want to know," Tommy began, a slight edge in his voice, "is why we should trust you with our future." Jake swallowed hard, confiding in the open space between them. "Because I'm not just thinking about myself or my ranch. I want to build something that supports all of us." He leaned in, emphasizing his intention. "We've all seen the decline in traditional ranching. We have this opportunity to adapt together, to share knowledge and innovate the way we run these lands." Sarah nodded, but there was a flicker of doubt in her expression. "Change is hard, Jake. We've built our lives on a foundation that's been stable for years. Why should we gamble on your plans?" The challenge hung in the air, thickening around them. Jake felt the tension coiling within him. How much of himself was he willing to expose? He had ventured into the territory of vulnerability, and now he stood at a crossroads, navigating the tightrope of ambition and self-preservation. What if you could increase your yield without sacrificing quality? What if we could foster community resilience through shared resources? He proposed, his voice gaining urgency. "I've been researching sustainable techniques used in other states. They work. I know they can work here." Tommy crossed his arms, considering. "If we go down this road with you, we're putting a lot at risk. Our livelihoods depend on what we already know." "We all have something at stake," Jake shot back. The raw honesty surprised even him. "But what if our livelihoods become something better? We've all seen the challenges. What's the alternative? To keep clinging to traditions that may not serve us in the long run?" A heavy silence fell again, the weight of Jake's words echoing in the barn like an unwelcome truth. He was no longer the solitary figure in his own struggle. Now he was part of a larger picture, and that realization sparked an ember of determination within him. "I've been afraid," he finally admitted, tilting his head as if acknowledging his own shortcomings. "Afraid of failing, of being seen as foolish? But isn't that what growth requires? Taking risks?" At that moment, Jake felt a shift, however small. He had asserted not just his vision, but his vulnerability, showing them that behind his proposals lay a person ready to confront the fear of rejection. In that intimate space, he had connected on a level he hadn't anticipated. Sarah's expression softened, and for the first time, Jake caught a glimmer of receptivity. "You've got guts, I'll give you that," she said, an unambiguous sincerity in her words. "We're still skeptical, but your passion is hard to ignore." Tommy leaned forward, the tension easing from his shoulders. "Maybe it's worth exploring further, but we have our reservations. We're old dogs. New tricks take time." Jake's heart raced at the prospect, but it was tempered by the realization that this was only the beginning. "Let's meet again. I'll bring detailed plans and examples. We can brainstorm ideas together." With tentative agreement, they parted ways, each retreating to their own thoughts. As Jake returned to his chores, his pulse raced with the thrill of newfound possibilities coupled with the lingering shadow of uncertainty. Had he taken a step too far, or was this the pivotal shift his journey required? Later that evening, as he reviewed his notes, Jake's resolve crystallized. He wouldn't just stop at building a coalition, he had to embody the leader he wanted to become. This meant embracing the challenge of criticism and doubt as opportunities for refinement and growth. The prospect of change no longer felt like a hollow echo, but rather a vibrant tapestry waiting to be woven. He closed the notebook and took a deep breath, setting the intention to remain authentic even in the face of potential rejection. Yet, another thought loomed. In aiming to invite others into his vision, was he prepared to confront those still anchored to traditions resistant to change? The ranching world was vast, rife with differing opinions. Fear lingered, intertwining with determination like roots in the soil. What lay ahead would test not just his vision, but the very foundation of his connection to the land and those who cultivated it. As dusk settled over the ranch, the horizon seemed to whisper promises, yet shadows awaited to challenge him. The next step in this journey beckoned. Would Jake be prepared to defend his dreams against the storms of criticism that approached? The next morning, the sun broke through the horizon, casting a warm glow over the barn where Jake had spent the previous night in reflection. The golden light caressed the wooden beams, breathing life into his surroundings and filling him with a sense of renewed purpose. But that sense of purpose was laced with an undercurrent of anxiety. He still had no way of knowing how Sarah and Tommy would respond to his ideas when they met again later in the week. As Jake walked through the familiar expanse of the ranch, he felt the weight of expectation resting firmly on his shoulders. The animals grazed peacefully, unaware of the storm brewing within him. Every step forward required a deeper layer of commitment, not just to his vision, but to the relationships he was trying to build. Could he truly gain their trust? Or would he find himself isolated once more, standing alone on the precipice of an unknown future? He headed to his small workshop, a place cluttered with tools and plans on how to integrate sustainable farming practices into their ranching ethos. For years, it had been a place of solace, and now it demanded his full attention. The shelves brimmed with notebooks, each filled with research from other farms that had thrived despite the decline of traditional ranching. It was time to transform that knowledge into actionable plans. Jake flipped through pages of meticulously crafted notes, highlighting techniques that had been successful elsewhere. The use of crop rotation, the introduction of cover crops, and rotational grazing systems that yielded both environmental and economic benefits. But his mind kept drifting back to his conversation with Tommy and Sarah. He needed more than just information. He needed a compelling narrative that aligned their skepticism with the potential promise of renewal. As he worked, he felt the tension in his body begin to dissipate. The rhythm of his hands, guiding tools and shaping ideas, provided an unexpected remedy. For every skeptical notion he'd faced, he wove together retorts in his mind, crafting responses to their concerns. Each thought sharpened his conviction, transforming fear into a meticulously constructed case for change. Before he knew it, a plan had taken shape, one not just centered on what he deemed best, but one that acknowledged the values and experiences that had sustained his neighbors for generations. He would need to highlight the risks of stagnation alongside the risks of change, painting an honest picture of the future. Could he genuinely mitigate their fears while igniting flames of enthusiasm? Just as he finished refining the details, he heard a familiar voice. "Hey, Jake." It was Tommy, standing at the entrance to the workshop, hands shoved in his pockets. His expression was unreadable. "Hey, Tommy," Jake replied, forcing himself to maintain eye contact. He held his breath, anticipating that the moment of truth had arrived sooner than he'd expected. Tommy stepped in, surveying the clutter. "So I've been thinking, maybe we should have a more formal meeting." Jake's heart leapt. "A formal meeting?" "Yeah, I want to get the other ranchers involved too. If we're doing this, we need to make sure everyone is on board. They need to hear your ideas firsthand." Jake's mind raced with possibilities. On one hand, this felt like a significant opportunity. On the other, it risked escalating the complexity of convincing a larger audience with even more entrenched views. "Are you sure that's what you want?" Jake inquired, trying to mask the trepidation rippling through him. "It might make things messier. Not everyone will see it the way you do." "I believe in what you're saying," Tommy asserted, determination radiating from him. "But it won't mean anything if we don't discuss it with the others. If we're going to move forward, we have to face their resistance together." Together. The word rang powerfully in Jake's mind. Perhaps there was still a chance to promote unity even when confronting the specter of tradition. "Okay," Jake finally responded, a mix of apprehension and excitement washing over him. "We'll set it up and I'll prepare my presentation." He hardly noticed the clouds rolling in across the distant mountains, heavy with impending rain, mirroring his own internal storm. "Just one thing," Tommy said as he turned to leave. "Make sure you're ready for the tough questions. There'll be a lot of people who won't want to change." Jake nodded, realizing the importance of every piece of feedback now. The previous night's vulnerability gave way to a new challenge: how to defend not just his vision, but his very identity as a rancher amongst a group steeped in tradition. As Tommy departed, Jake looked out at the darkening sky, feeling the weight of both possibility and doubt. In his heart, he knew he had only begun to scratch the surface of the opposition that awaited him. Would he be strong enough to stand firm against the rising tide of skepticism? One thought gripped him with urgency. This was not merely a test of ideas, but a test of who he was becoming as a leader. Would he rise to the occasion, demonstrating resilience against not just the elements of nature, but against the deeply rooted fears in the hearts of those around him? The time for preparation had arrived. The spotlight loomed heavy before him. Would he manage to illuminate a path for himself and for the others? Or would the storm of doubt extinguish the fire he was trying to ignite? Jake stood alone in the workshop, the oppressive silence wrapping around him like a thick fog. Each tick of the clock filled the air with reminders of the approaching meeting. The thought of standing before a group of seasoned ranchers, some of whom had known him since he was a boy, sent jolts of anxiety through him. Against the backdrop of familiarity, he felt as if he were an intruder in his own life. He took a deep breath, attempting to steady his racing heart. The walls of the workshop loomed close, cluttered with tools that had once brought him comfort now felt stifling. There was no room for sentimentality as he prepared to step into a role that required him to bear the weight of change, not just for himself, but for a community that had resisted it for generations. Jake spread his notes across the workbench again, retracing the planned presentation. He had been diligent in constructing a fact-based approach, yet a gnawing doubt surged forward. Would statistics alone resonate with his audience? Perhaps what he needed was to weave in his own story. His journey from an uncertain ranch hand to a passionate advocate for sustainable practices. This was not just about methodologies, it was about heart, and they needed to feel that. The sunlight began to fade, shadows stretching ominously as thick clouds rolled in, casting a somber tone across the barn. The darkening sky felt strangely relatable. It mirrored the brewing tension within him. He steadied himself against the workbench, closing his eyes and visualizing the faces of those he'd be addressing. Their lines had weathered storms far beyond what he faced. He imagined Sarah's skepticism, Tommy's cautious optimism, and the stony expressions from other ranchers, each laden with the weight of their experiences. "What if they dismiss me?" the thought rattled through his mind. Determined, Jake opened his eyes and grabbed a piece of scrap wood, visualizing it as a shield against his fears. As he whittled away at the edges, he asked himself what it truly meant to be resilient. The answer began to emerge. Resilience wasn't merely about enduring, but about fostering connections. He had to present not just an idea, but a vision inclusive of their pasts and hopeful for their futures. He paused, the makeshift tool in hand, brow furrowed. Could he balance his enthusiasm with an understanding of their reservations? Their skepticism was rooted in history, not ignorance. He considered the burdens they carried, their livelihoods, the weight of family legacies. His heart raced from the dawning realization that he too had been weighing those burdens through the years. This moment was pivotal, yes, but it was also an opportunity to bridge gaps and innovate while honoring traditions. As darkness enveloped the barn, Jake felt the weight lift slightly. He wasn't just an outsider proposing change. He was a part of this community, forged by its values, and yet still striving for evolution. Perhaps it was his responsibility not only to share knowledge, but also to invite dialogue, to cultivate trust by fostering an open exchange about fears and desires. He glanced at the clock. Time was creeping away from him. A wave of urgency propelled him into action. He gathered all his research, notes, and personal anecdotes. This was not just preparation. It was his mission, not just for himself, but for everyone who'd entrusted him with their land tomorrow. His hands moved deftly, arranging the materials into a coherent presentation. The lines of doubt slowly faded as he shifted from anxious apprehension to focused determination. It was clear now that he would meet this challenge not as a lone voice but as a rightful steward of a shared legacy. As the last light disappeared, casting shadows that danced across the walls, Jake caught sight of his reflection on the taut surface of a shiny tool. The man staring back was not just a rancher with a vision. He was a leader emerging from the depths of vulnerability, ready to confront uncertainty head-on. But even as confidence surged within him, a troubling thought gnawed at his resolve. What if they rejected him completely, undermining every ounce of effort he had poured into this moment? Would he falter, or could he endure deeper scrutiny to forge a new path? The next day would demand all of him, and the outcome was impossible to predict. As he locked up the workshop and stepped into the night, the storm began to roll in, deep and thunderous, just as it had in his heart. For Jake, the escalating tensions mirrored the storm brewing above. Would he emerge as the leader he longed to be, or would he be swept away in the tempest of doubt? The dawn broke over the horizon like a whispering promise, the sky painted with hues of pale orange and soft pink. Jake awoke restless, his dreams a swirl of anxious faces and disapproving glances. The meeting loomed heavily over him, an impending storm of scrutiny he knew he would soon face. He pulled himself out of bed, each movement deliberate but weighted by the uncertainty that clung to him. Standing in front of the bathroom mirror, he examined the reflection. There were bags beneath his eyes, evidence of sleepless nights spent wrestling with his thoughts. Today was pivotal, a chance not only to present his ideas, but also to assert his place within the ranching community. Would those who once saw him as a boy truly recognize him as a man capable of leading change? He dressed slowly, selecting a shirt that felt trustworthy, a reminder of the man he had become rather than the boy he once was. He needed to embody confidence, to project an aura of authority that would compel them to listen. But as he slipped into his boots, a wave of doubt surged. Did he even know what he was advocating for in the face of their fears? Despite his intention to foster dialogue, the reality remained that those old biases wouldn't easily soften. Jake thought about the connections he shared with the ranchers, the years spent learning in the shadow of their expertise. They were stories bound by loyalty and legacy. Yet he knew deep down that there was a shift necessary for survival, both for the land and future generations. The drive to the meeting felt interminable. The gravel road seemed to stretch endlessly. Jake mentally rehearsed the opening lines of his presentation, but they often veered into an uncertain loop, sparking his anxiety anew. Would he even be able to hold their attention? He had spent nights crafting statistics and anecdotes meant to resonate, yet a growing frustration with data over empathy haunted him. Could he frame his thoughts in a way that honored their histories while embracing a hopeful future? Arriving at the town hall, he noticed the familiar faces of fellow ranchers lingering outside, engaged in conversation. Swallowing hard, he stepped out of the truck, greeting a few with tentative nods. Each exchange felt like a tightrope walk, balancing the weight of friendship with the anticipated resistance toward change. His heart thudded loudly in his chest as he approached the entrance. Inside, the dimly lit room smelled of aging wood and faint coffee, an ambiance steeped in tradition. He observed the crowd assembled, hardened faces, brows furrowed in skepticism, each holding stories of toil and triumph born from the land they cherished. After a few moments of awkward mingling, it was time to present. Jake stood before them, palms slightly clammy, breath shallow. He scanned the room, catching hints of concern in Sarah's crossed arms and Tommy's frown, a mirror of his own internal conflict. The clock ticked maddeningly loud, each second a reminder of the urgency of the moment. As he cleared his throat, the room quieted, but the stirring doubt surged again, louder this time. What if they couldn't see his vision? Would his vulnerability be perceived as weakness? As he began his presentation, he consciously fought against the urge to simplify his points in order to avoid scrutiny. He spoke passionately, intertwining his research with his personal journey, humanizing the statistics with stories of hope shared among friends and family. Gradually, an unexpected warmth enveloped the room, the eyes of his audience softening. With every anecdote, he felt the walls they had built in resistance begin to crack. Yet, just as momentum built, the storm pulled away from the horizon, merging with a thunderous rumble from a rancher at the back. "You've known us your whole life, Jake," he challenged, voice steady, yet cutting through the warmth. "What makes you think we can trust your vision?" The reaction was immediate. Tension rippled through the crowd. Jake's stomach knotted, not with fear, but urgency. It was time to engage, not just as a proponent of change, but as a fellow rancher who understood their deep-seated values. What he didn't anticipate was the vulnerability that would rise within him, a stirring realization that trust was not a transaction but a dialogue. He didn't just have to talk, he had to truly listen. As the discussion unfolded, he felt the pressure transform into a call for understanding. His eyes darted around the room, absorbing the nuances of expressions and reactions. The time had come for more than just statistics and goodwill. It was an opportunity to confront their concerns head-on, validating their fears while reinforcing his commitment to community and the land. But in that moment of revelation, one thought gnawed at him. What if he could not find the words to bridge the gap? Jake squared his shoulders, ready to face uncertainty with the same tenacity that had always defined his journey. The shadows of doubt were still present, but he realized he wouldn't be alone in this struggle. The real test of leadership was about to begin, and all too soon, Jake would discover just how deep the chasm of tradition ran. The air buzzed with anticipation as Jake took his place at the front of the room, the murmurs and shifting bodies a testament to the collective uncertainty swirling among his peers. He needed to prove not only his understanding of modern ranching practices, but also his dedication to preserving their shared legacy. "Thank you all for being here today," he began, his voice firm but laced with the humility he had come to embrace. "What we're discussing transcends simple techniques. It's about securing our way of life amidst a world that is changing rapidly." As he laid out the foundation of his ideas, crop rotations, sustainable grazing, and eco-friendly practices, he intermingled the facts with anecdotes that reflected their struggles, passions, and ambitions. He highlighted the possibility of transforming their ranches into thriving ecosystems, nurturing both the land and their livelihoods. Jake sensed a flicker of engagement spark in some faces, but he needed to do more to ignite their trust. He paused, gauging the crowd, then extended an invitation. "Let's talk. I want to hear your concerns. What are you worried about if we try something new?" A rancher from the back stood up, frowning deeply. "Jake, we've always done things a certain way. What makes you think that your ideas will work for us when we've spent generations doing just fine?" "Because I'm not here to take away what you've built. I'm here to help you evolve it," Jake replied, his heart pounding with each word. "Tradition offers wisdom, and I respect that immensely, but there's also space for innovation. If we continue as we have, we risk losing everything, not just our land, but our community connections and even our identity as ranchers." There were murmurs of agreement mingled with skepticism. He could see that they were thinking. Time unraveled against his unwavering resolve. This moment had become a testament not just to the viability of his ideas, but to his growth as a person. A transition from the stubborn boy fighting against change to an empowered man willing to engage in difficult conversations. He went on to describe how Clara's guidance had opened his eyes, how her perspective of blending the old with the new was not just beneficial, but necessary. "We're at a crossroads," he insisted. "The decisions we make today will ensure either our continuation or our decline. Look around. Our cattle, our crops, they deserve better, and so do we." Emboldened by the stirring atmosphere, Jake began to share his vision for a community garden, a collaborative project that would invite everyone to partake, blending their knowledge with modern practices to create a dynamic learning space. Imagine bringing families in, he urged. What if we became a destination, a place where we can educate and inspire future generations? Some faces lit up. They could envision a thriving ranching hub, an educational sanctuary intertwined with local culture. Yet skepticism lingered in the air like the storm clouds that had threatened. A woman raised her hand, her brow furrowed. Sounds great in theory, Jake, but what if the weather turns? What if we lose money trying something new? At that moment, Jake felt an undeniable clarity. The risk of stagnation is far greater than the risks of progress, he stated, his voice steady and self-assured. Failure comes with any venture. It's part of our journey as ranchers. But what we won't achieve is the opportunity to grow, to claim our place as leaders in this evolving landscape. A profound silence settled as his words resonated deeply within the hearts of his audience. They were navigating their fears, confronting the fear of losing their way while grappling with the promise of a new dawn. Jake wrapped up his presentation, recognizing that he had shared more than just ideas. He had unveiled the depths of his heart. But this was only the first step. He needed to listen, to embrace their doubts as an integral part of the conversation. As discussions began to unfold, Jake's confidence solidified. He witnessed the transformation not just within himself, but reflected in the group's evolving mindset. Skepticism turned to dialogue. Each rancher who spoke shared their concerns, fears, and hopes, and he found himself weaving their insights back into the fabric of his vision. Days passed into weeks, and the ideas began to crystallize into action. Jake led the charge toward the community garden, and as work progressed, relationships deepened. He saw Tommy and Sarah involved, stepping into roles they had previously been hesitant to embrace. There was a camaraderie blossoming where tradition coalesced with transparency. As the garden flourished, so did Jake's own sense of self. The realization he was part of a larger fabric, deeply rooted yet flexible enough to sway, solidified his place within this ranching community. He no longer stood apart, isolated by fear. He embraced the interconnected nature of their journey. Recognition from his peers materialized. They acknowledged not only his vision but his unwavering dedication. Invitations to share his insights at local gatherings poured in, and unexpected collaborations emerged as fellow ranchers sought Jake's guidance in revising age-old methods. He had surpassed his doubts and emerged stronger, not only for himself but for the land and those who had become his allies. As he looked out at the flourishing garden, a symbol of resilience and innovation, Jake felt an overwhelming sense of fulfillment wash over him. The path had been fraught with uncertainty, yet each step had led him to a profound personal achievement. He was not just a rancher tied to a past legacy, but a leader molding a vibrant future. This journey had taught him that strength lay not in unchecked resolve, but in the willingness to adapt, collaborate, and uplift those around him. As he watched the sun setting behind the plains, painting the sky with colors of hope and promise, Jake understood the power of transformation. It wasn't only about cultivating the land, but about nurturing relationships, embracing growth, and confronting fears. And as the first stars twinkled overhead, Jake knew in his heart he was ready for whatever came next, embracing the future while honoring the past, fulfilling his role as a steward of both land and community. Subscribe immediately to the channel to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm because seriously, it makes a difference. Comment your reactions and theories about the ending. Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. This is the moment to show your support. Don't wait even one more second to share. Only true fans of personal overcoming stories understand the importance of these actions.